Five Rings Podcast, your weekly amateur sports and Olympic sports show with Duane, Rollins, and Kevin Laramee. And now, without further ado, here's Duane, Rollins.
Kevin, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Duane.
Why do we still care about the Olympics?
I don't know, especially watching this movie a few times in the last few days. Yeah, it's heavy.
I know, but yet we still do, which is why we have this show, which is why we're going to have this conversation. We're talking about Icarus, the documentary, which has been out now for about a year, I guess. And so many of you that are listening to this show have probably heard it, but or seen it, I should say. But yeah, it's a very difficult thing to watch if you care about the Olympic movement. And I think what is most moving about that movie, Kevin, is that the people that are in it care about the Olympics. I think, anyway. Do they?
Yeah, well, they care about a lot of things about the Olympics. Some of them it's about the sport. Some of them it's about what they can gain from the Olympics. Some of them, like politicians, like Vladimir Putin, it's about what can the Olympics do for my image and help me do stuff after. Yeah, so how about we start from the beginning, Duane? Like this movie, Brian Fogel, director and main protagonist in this movie, the cyclist who's trying to
cyclist, we should do cyclist.
Yeah, exactly. He's a cyclist, and you know, I've been writing not as much as Brian, but I had that thought process before too. Like, how good would I be if I put things under my skin? And he set out to maybe answer that question by doing maybe the toughest cycling race, not called pro, that you can in the whole world. And the thing is, I'm a big cycling fan, and I never heard of that race before. So I was like, oh wow, that's crazy! 7 days and like the worst mountains, and the Ventoux and the Col de la Madeleine and the Col de l'Izoard and etc. The toughest ones. And I'm like, this is impossible to do. It turns out that, well, a lot of dopers do that race, Duane, by the way. Just an outside note, because that's the movie that starts, right? He trains and he does it the first time, and there's Peter Pouly who wins, and he's like, like 3 minutes in front of everyone after day one, where Peter Pouly was suspended for doping in 2002, Duane, and as well was disqualified from a race in 2016 for mechanical doping. He claimed it was because his bike was just too light, but there was a lot of other claims made, but never mind. It starts like a cycling movie of a man who wants to understand and to experience what it's like to maybe dope and maybe go win a race.
Well, no, there's no doubt. First off, if you haven't seen this movie, it's basically two movies in one, right? Like
it is.
The first half of the movie, yeah, and both of them are compelling in their own way. And the first half is about this amateur cyclist that wants to see what doping will do for him, and he does. He has a 20% improvement on his power, basically, is what we see at the end of his training regimen, and they don't spend a lot of time on it, and I think that's a little bit of an editing decision, because the second half of the movie is.
Yeah, but things kind of hit the fan during the race, in the second race, while he goes to Europe, and such racing. That's where Gregory Rodchenkov, literally the whole story unfolds. And you know, we're going to talk about everything now. I'm going to start with the beginning, but remember our timeline during Sochi. We were doing daily shows. We were saying, this doesn't look normal. This looks suspicious. I don't know. Cross-country skiing, Russia sweeping the podium. What's going on, people? It's funny how it's an image that was used in the documentary, too. Whenever they were showing Russian winning in Sochi, was always that podium of the three Russians sweeping that event.
I've got to go back and look for my wood medal the day that I said my wood medal was the fact that there wasn't any positive tests, because it was suspicious.
Now we know why, because there were thousands of tests that were just destroyed by Gregory Rodchenkov. And I don't know, we'll get into the movie in a second. I don't know about how I feel about him. He's a likable man. He looks like a great guy to have a beer with, and I'm like, dude.
I was going to ask you that. Is he a villain or a hero in this movie? It's hard to tell. And I mean, I think that says everything about the entire doping situation, right?
Well, I think
he's a decent
both.
guy, but at the same time, he's a decent guy, but at the same time, he basically was responsible for everything that we hate, right?
Oh, yeah. He was told to do so, probably. So that's where maybe we draw the line. But I'm gonna ask you a question now, and I'll ask you the same question maybe when we're done the show. What's the difference between doping and anti-doping? We always thought it was different. We always thought it was two opposite ends of a spectrum. Maybe it's just two different names for the same damn thing.
Oh man,
That's deep, eh?
I'll tell you. I'll go to the movie right now. I'll tell you what the difference is. Did you see Becky's face when he?
Christina Ayott's face too.
There's a moment. If you haven't seen the movie, go watch it now. But and then listen to this after. But there's a moment where the protagonist, Brian Fogel, is telling what he knows, and her face, the athlete's face, is like, "Oh my God, are you serious?" It's basically that. It's the perfect face.
Yeah. All right. So the movie starts. This is probably not going to be a safe for work podcast. All right. So let's start now. The shit hit the fan when they go deep into who Gregory Rodchenkov is. But what's interesting to me, Duane, is not just the mentality of a Gregory Rodchenkov trying to do this and to learn and to practice his skills, basically, as a chemist, as the director of the WADA Russian lab. It's insane. It's Don Catlin, a famous, very famous director of the UCLA Olympic Lab, where he tested about Lance Armstrong about 50 times. He was part in the 70s and 80s at the beginning of anti-doping and how to do a lot of different tests in laboratories and how the protocols behind everything. Don Catlin is an important figure in that world. What's interesting to me, Duane, too, is he was interested about what Brian Fogel was trying to do. And he got cold feet. And he's like, yeah, this might not be good for my reputation. But Don Catlin is not necessarily as clean as we see in this movie. There's a lot of similarities between a Don Catlin and a Gregory Rodchenkov. I'm not accusing anything here. But it's the same mentality, though. They're so fascinated about how either, like, to understand doping and anti-doping properly, you kind of have to understand doping. To catch them properly, you have to experience how they do it. And I think it's interesting how that mentality of the chemist, they really want to learn how the other side works.
No, there's no doubt about that. If you look at the first half of the movie, I think there's a very interesting story that's going on there. And it's basically these people that work, that supposedly try to catch the dopers, willing to help this guy that is looking to show that it's impossible to catch them. And I think that's their agenda. That's his agenda at that point, is to illustrate how impossible their job is. And I think that informs a lot of the movie. I mean, look, Kevin, there's no black and white hats in the world of athletics. There isn't. Everyone understands that there's cheating that goes on, whether that's cheating mechanically, whether that's cheating chemically, whether that's cheating, yet none of us, I think, are capable of actually living that life. And that's the saddest thing about this movie, is it makes me realize that as much as we all love the Olympics, as much as we all love the Olympic movement, I don't think any of us are capable of living the ideals that it pretends to personify.
Well, maybe the ideals are not realistic either. We are all saying, oh, fair play, cleanliness. It's man doing man things. And when I'm saying man, I'm thinking of humankind here.
Human, yeah.
It's humankind doing what humankind does. Humans been trying to cheat since the dawn of time. Like, whatever you believe in,
no,
it's what humans always try to do. We always try to cheat or get, like, cross that line, or at least, like, rub against it as hard as possible.
We're trying to get an edge. And we'll justify what that edge is, regardless of what it is. I mean, sticking something up your bum, you're going to go, everyone's doing it, so it's okay. Look, this movie is awful, but at the same time, it's awful but important. Right?
It's amazing, but it's awful what it describes. Yeah, it's well done. It's like crazy well done. But yeah, it's awful what it depicts, for sure.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Anyway.
So it all starts when the German documentary on ARD, which the documentarist at that point, the journalist that works for that German channel, were still in Russia, and they were still like finishing their thing, and we're going to go public. They're waiting for the whistleblowers to get out of Russia, because we'll see down the road their safety was in jeopardy. And ways to swab B samples for posterity, way to swab the A sample to make sure there's no immediate positives, thousands of tests destroyed, all this leading to Gregory Rodchenkov, and that German documentary started an inquiry with the IOC, Duane, led by Dick Pound, former head of WADA here in Montreal, the World Anti-Doping Agency, and Richard McLaren as well was an important detective and commissioner in this inquiry, which led to the McLaren report. But this documentary, the German documentary on ARD, was basically the first piece of evidence that unfolded everything else we're going to talk about.
No doubt. I want to talk about Richard Pound Dick Pound for a second. I remember an interview that he did about 7 or 8 years ago that I heard on local radio here. And he was basically saying exactly what this documentary illustrated, that everything was dirty, everyone was cheating, that there was no possibility of catching anyone. This is the head of WADA at the time saying this stuff. And I remember when he hung the phone up, the two interviewers, which are both respected journalists here in Canada, just started laughing and basically making fun of him because they thought he was a paranoid old fool. It turns out that the paranoid old fool was right, and that's depressing, Kevin.
Yeah. And, the thing is, it's so blatant. Anyways, so the inquiry begins, and there's the independent commission, and it turns out that, well, they found that 100% of the claims in the documentary were true. And it was just the beginning. Then they figure out what Gregory Rodchenkov was doing and who he was. Gregory Rodchenkov, Duane, let's talk about him for a second.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about, is he a villain? Is he a victim? Is he a little bit of both? There's a lot of quotes from the movie. No, the movie's terrible. Don't watch the movie. But the book is pretty good. 1984, George Orwell. Yeah, don't watch the movie. Read the book. You kind of have to read the book to understand our society.
You should read the book.
Yeah.
Pretty much everyone has read the book. It's in our grade 12 high school literature class. But anyway, go ahead.
There you go. So, a lot of quotes from that book in the movie. And I think Gregory Rodchenkov is a bit like the protagonist, like O'Brien, in the book. So for me, Rodchenkov, who is he? He's an athlete, former athlete in the 60s and 70s with the Moscow University. Not good enough to be like Olympic level, but decent at the 1500 meters and the 5K in running.
Well, he's a bit like Brian Fogel. Like they have a little in common there.
Yeah, the difference is in the 60s and 70s, Rodchenkov took a bunch of stanozolol and other doping to try to make it. He couldn't, but he had an affinity with chemistry and decided to enroll himself to Moscow University's chemical department because he loved the Olympic sports. He loved chemistry. Hey, the doping, anti-doping world. Why not? And he went into Moscow University, and eventually, a few years later, which we don't learn this in the movie quite earlier on, when we learn about his history later on only, it unfolds the little gap between and the university and starting to be the director of the Moscow laboratory sanctioned by WADA. But that's what happens after university. Now we know when you watch the movie at that. Eventually, he landed himself in jail because, and then he was probably drugged and he was in a depressive state and trying to commit suicide, and then landed off in a psychiatrist kind of prison. And he was kind of starting to feel better, which, in my point of view, and that's not said in the movie, but a clear-cut classic case of over-medication, and eventually they found out the right balance a few years later, and he started to become better. And then that's where Putin comes and sees him like, dude, I have a redemption story for you. How about you win all the medals for me in Sochi, and you're good to go. That's really what it feels like, the missing years in his story. That's what I think happened.
No, perhaps, yeah. Like what I think they do well with him is they humanize him in a way that makes us understand that, again, no white, no black hats. He's just a guy. He's a decent guy. They make him seem likable, but at the same time, he's the main man responsible for doping the thing we love. but yet we can't hate him at the end of this movie. We're cheering for him. In fact, the very last scene of the movie, when he's playing with Max on the beach, that's the perfect scene. It says everything about it. I mean, this movie is about the fact that these are just humans with fragile humans making the same kind of decisions that you or I would make, and that's, I think, Kevin, what makes this so very moving and frustrating all at the same time, because I don't know how to fix it, because I can't say that I wouldn't, buy a beer with that guy or give that guy a hug or let that guy play with my dog either, because he just seems like a decent guy, but yet he fixed the entire Olympics, and that's, oh man.
Well, the thing is, we're talking about the entire Olympics. It's been going on since 1968. It never stopped. It's a succession of quote-unquote witch doctors at the top of the Russian national teams, all of the Russian national teams. It starts with Portugal and other ones too. And that's another part of the story. But, in the movie, it talks about the 3 stages. Well, that's a quote from 1984, Duane. But there's 3 stages to your reintegration, Mr. O'Brien. There's learning, there's understanding, and there's acceptance. I just want to finish introducing a few characters with you, Duane, and then I want to move into the learning part of this podcast. We've talked about Gregory Rodchenkov. There's 2 other really important Russian antagonists in that case, that I would like to talk about. One is dead actually now, and it's kind of fitting to talk about him too, because he was one of the good friends of Gregory Rodchenkov, Mr. Nikita Kamaev, former executive director of RUSADA, and on November 15, 2017, he was found dead, died of a massive heart attack. It turns out that he never had any heart problems before.
Allegedly.
Exactly, so it's an alleged massive heart attack. We all know what we mean here, but Nikita Kamaev was writing a book about everything that he saw leading up to Sochi and in Sochi and RUSADA and all the, we talk about a mission, like, of course, the RUSADA is the Russian anti-doping agency, and technically, like, their mission is to counteract doping. Well, the actual mission was to counteract anti-doping and to facilitate doping, and we see this in all the actions that RUSADA did leading up to the point of Nikita Kamaev's death, which everything that he knew died with him, and that's kind of what is fitting here. Is we get a big part of the story with Gregory Rodchenkov. We were missing a bit of the RUSADA side because of the demise of Mr. Nikita Kamaev, but this is one of the characters important. The other one, which we're going to be talking about, I think, a lot for the next 12 months, Duane, and that's unfortunate, but is that Vitaly Mutko. Right now, he's the deputy prime minister of Russia. He was the Russian sports minister for the 2014 Olympic Games, and he is the executive director of the Russia 2018 World Cup in Russia. And Mr. Vitaly Mutko is now banned for life by the IOC. That came out a few weeks ago at the same time as Russia was announced to be banned for the PyeongChang 2018 game. But Vitaly Mutko, probably the shadiest of characters that I've seen in a documentary movie. This has the making of a Bond villain. This has the making of the craziest Marvel bad guy out there you can have in the movies. It's even worse than that.
When you say Bond villain, a Russian spy novel, this is the thing about the second half of this documentary. The first half, let me say this for a second. The first half of the documentary is really worthwhile, and it's almost should be presented in 2 parts, because there's a lot to talk about there. The least of which being the fact that there's so much doping going out there that even if you dope, you can't actually catch up to the dopers, because the dopers are doping more than they're better than you. And anyway, there's a whole lot going on there. But the second half of this movie, it's a Russian spy novel. It's not believable, and I think that's partly why this works, is because it's so unbelievable what's going on that you can't wrap your head around it.
Or you can't make it up. Like, no one would believe you if you make this story as a fiction. Look, no way. That's unbelievable, unrealistic. There's no way you will be able to achieve success in Operación Sochi Resultat. There's no way you're going to get that trapdoors and those samples and hidden pockets and lab coats to make sure you smuggle things in and out. No, there's no way that can all be. The logistic is crazy. Well, it turns out it happened and it's real life.
If there was a movie before Sochi, if there was a movie in which KGB guys walked through a darkened, sort of
Tunnel.
alleyway,
Like a tunnel.
at 3 a.m. and slipped urine samples through a trap door to a lab guy that switched them off, we'd go, it's a good story. It's fun to watch, but there's no way that could ever happen.
Unopenable bottle being opened in 30 minutes. No.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's the most believable thing about this movie is that they figured out a way to open this bottle because, of course, there's
they reverse
technology to
engineer
open
it. Come on, they're
anything,
going to
but-
sacrifice one and then figure it out.
Yeah, they spent an inordinate amount of money trying to figure out how to open bottles that aren't openable, and they figured out how to open them. And then, the fact that the entire anti-doping industry relies on the fact that, these bottles can't be opened. Of course, no one's going to figure out how to open them. Man, come on, it's silly. I mean, it's so depressing because, this is the thing. They figured out this bottle that was unopenable, but yet, of course, they don't have the resources to counteract the fact that there's people with unlimited resources out there that are going to figure out how to open it. We're relying on people to not want to open the bottle, and that's kind of everything about this. We're
so
relying
naive.
on people to not care.
We should know better by now. And that's nothing against Russia. And that's one thing that I think it's important for us to say. We're talking a lot about Russia. We're talking about a lot of everything here. It's not just Russia. Let's be true here. Let's be true to ourselves here. There's a lot of other instances in the world that it's probably very similar to Russia. And you have to keep an open mind about those things right now.
Kevin, I'm doing the show right now looking at a magazine cover that has Ben Johnson on the cover. I am well aware that this is not just Russia. I mean, Russia perfected it, I think, in this way, and in terms of the state sponsorship. And that's, I think, the thing that we need to talk a little bit about. Like, the fact that it's state-sponsored is what makes this so egregious and why this is getting so much attention. But the reality is that there are people in Russia, in Germany, in Austria, in Canada, in the United States, everywhere around the world that are cheating the system right now, and I don't know how to stop it, and that's a problem.
Now, we've talked about, let's call this part the first minutes. So how long has it been? The first 20 minutes of this was the intro. Now, let's get into the learning aspect. Let's actually learn what happened. Duane, there's a few questions that Brian Fogel asked Brian Rodchenkov in the beginning of the learning aspect in this movie. Did Russia have a statewide system in place to cheat the Olympics? Yes.
Yes.
Were you the mastermind of the system that cheated the Olympics? Of course. Yes. Saying like it's nothing. I would at least be crying,
Well, at that point, I think that, look, he's a fascinating character. That relationship, and I think that the way that Brian reacts to him is exactly how all of us would. And again, I can't underline this enough. How they humanize him, I think, is important, because I think that we all look at cheaters as these black hat villains, but the reality is they're just like us, and that's something that's very difficult to wrap our head around.
Yeah.
Like I keep going, because this movie, if I was going to summarize this movie, that's what I do. I go,
Was Vladimir Putin aware of the Russian doping system? Yes, he even knows my name. He's going to say otherwise, but he knows me. He talked to me. He got me out of prison.
Of course he does. I mean, we saw that chart of his popularity drop before Sochi and then going up about 20%, right? Like that's.
I'm getting there. This is going to be the understanding part. and we'll understand a lot more about Russia and the Olympics and sporting and how everything a Russian sees himself today is all led to a dark moment in 2007. But let's finish with the learning part. Russia in 2008 won 73 medals. How many of them were dirty? 30. 30. That's a little under half. And now in London,
which is still pretty bad. But
yeah, it's insane. In London, 2012, London, 81 medals, and he says over 50% were dirty. There's a gap there to Vancouver, because Vancouver was the moment that made realize everyone. Turns out that, getting to Canada and trying to bring all your stuff to Canada and it's a little more difficult than anticipated. And, well, this may be a argument for future Olympics where they should be held in the world. But sometimes we're in part of the world that everything's kind of checked. You kind of can't get away with stuff. And Vancouver, now, with everything we know now to this day, we can say Vancouver were a pretty clean Olympics, especially if you look at the results of Vancouver compared to everywhere else. Any other Olympics surrounding Vancouver, the results were kind of different.
Well, at least we hope so, because
it meant that we would have been doped, and that's the bad thing about this.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, look, again, I want to underline this. I'm under no delusions that there aren't Canadian athletes to this day that are dope. This isn't a anti the rest of the world, pro Canada kind of conversation, because everyone that listens to this knows that we're Canadian. We all know that there are cheaters everywhere. It's just particularly difficult in this situation to have an entire system that's supporting the cheating, and I think that's the key. And what I will say about this country is, I'm looking at that magazine right now of Ben Johnson. When Ben Johnson was caught, and there's a lot of speculation of why he in particular was caught, whether or not that was a symbolism catch, for the dirtiest 100-meter funnel of all time. But
sacrificing of the lamb.
What we did earnestly was we had a 12-month, research project that looked at this, and we called it out. We, like Ben Johnson to this day, if anyone else, if I showed this magazine cover that I keep talking about right now to people on the street, there's a lot of people that would go, well, why do you have that? They'd look at him in the same way that they would look at like a mass murderer, like
an assassin or something.
Serial. Yeah, they don't, like, he's not beloved at all in the general public. I think that's the one thing that we have done in this country well, is that we have, we called it out and we've said this isn't cool. We're not okay with it, and that's okay. That's a good thing. And what I'm saying with Russia is that they're legitimizing this thing, and that's the problem. They're legitimizing. Everyone's going to try and cheat. Like Kevin, you and I, if I was a good enough athlete to be close to the Olympic level, and someone told me that I could stick something in my bum for 3 months and that would take me from almost an Olympian to an Olympian, God help me, I'd do it. And most of us probably would.
I have to agree with you. That's a difficult thing here. It's the mentality of wanting to win at all costs that brings you to dark places sometimes. But another part of the learning aspect of this movie, Duane, I learned a few things here. Actually, a lot of my innocence kind of died in the next part of the movie. But I found a newfound respect for Jacques Rogue, which I never really liked the guy before, because he was so cold and stern and wasn't great to talk to. But apparently he had some balls because before 2008, China was the biggest producer of anabolics in high quality environment, very pharmaceutical style, produced by the state, but in a very controlled and a very high quality purity aspect of those anabolics. But before 2008, China was the biggest producer of this. But in 2008, that's where Beijing got the Olympics, so it must have happened during that time. Jacques Rogue told the government of China to stop producing anabolics, saying, look, you're an Olympic country, but you're the biggest damn producer of anabolics in the entire world. Stop it, please. And they did. But that produced a new problem. unpure doping drugs with impurities in them, and that's where positive started. Because this, what I learned as well is there's ways to eliminate a certain substance from your body, and if that substance is pure, then the way that you would want to do to eliminate it is more efficient because it is a pure compound. And a pure compound, you can isolate it and you can find a way to eliminate it in your bloodstream or in your urine, and it's working. When there's impurities, which would mean those impurities might not react the same way to the chemical you're putting into your body to eliminate the traces of the doping agent, well, leads to positive because it stays in your body or it's not reacting to your treatment. So that's what happened. So because of bad quality of drugs, because China stopped producing high quality drugs, it led Russia a very dark road.
Sure. I mean, yeah. I mean that's a conversation that can go beyond sports, right? Like, I mean, the argument, one of the arguments for legalizing drugs is to ensure that you're getting quality drugs, so that
Like
you're going to take them.
No fentanyl laced in your cocaine.
I was going to say,
use this example.
it's the fentanyl conversation, right? Like, yeah, like, you know, is that an argument or is that, I don't know. Like, this is a difficult question to sort of wrap your head around, but for sure. I mean, when you're talking about Beijing and China and them getting shut out and then leading them down the path to Russia, it all comes back to the same idea that I keep coming back to again and again and again, is that where is the clean part of the world? Like, where can we find places out there? And I'm not
places that are not bogged down by just winning at all costs. Places that doesn't necessarily have an agenda and wanting to increase their sphere of influence using sports and the Olympics to do so. And that leads me to the understanding part. Duane, in 2007, when Russia was awarded the Sochi Olympics, Russia was in a totally different place than Russia where it is now. If you go back to the mid-2000s, Russia had famines, had unemployment was through the roof. Vladimir Putin's acceptance rate was very down. He was just going off the transition of not being the president, going to be the prime minister, switching all the powers from president to prime minister, and then being the prime minister and putting Medvedev in his place. And then whenever 2 terms pass, he put himself back as president and switched it over and put the powers back on him. So basically, he never stopped being the head of state of Russia for the last 20-something years. And that's where in mid-2000s, his improvement rate was going down. And there was a strategy that might have been divided at that time to use sports. And I'm saying this with just the proof of the actual events. Look at everything since happened in sports in Russia since 2007. It started with the Sochi Olympic in 2014. Then in the same city, Sochi was built for sporting propaganda. And in Sochi, after the Olympics came Formula One. And then comes the World Cup in 2018. And everything that started with the good results in Sochi and before that in the Olympics because of doping, but in Sochi as well, it's the pride of Russia, pride of being Russian, and this led to having a better acceptance rate for Putin, a better approval rate, which led Putin to be able to do what he wants and look military, what Russia's been able to do since that day that the Olympics ended in 2014. And you'll get your understanding of how sports in itself and the different events that were announced and held since the announcement that Sochi would have the Olympic in 2007 lead us to the last few years and the next few years where Russia established a bigger sphere of influence in this world.
Well, which is the most depressing thing of all, because you're right, it worked. And here's the thing. Did you look at the fallout after they banned them from PyeongChang? Most Russians are convinced with the line that this is about
it's against
the
us,
rest of the world trying to put, it's us against the world. They're trying to put politics in sport. They hate us, blah, blah, blah. And you know what? People buy into that.
They're saying that the world is using sports as propaganda against us when it's called projection, people.
It's so,
Told you I would go to a deep place.
It takes us to a dark, dark place, and it makes us start thinking about like real world stuff and how, you know.
Yeah. how sports
to
was
use
used
it
here.
completely.
We were all used.
Well-
That's how I feel. I feel taken advantage of right now.
Well, yeah, but yet I'm still going to
I'm still going to do a daily
be
show.
here
regular.
daily cheering about snowboarders that I haven't heard of till 2 days before in 3 months, right? Like, this is the problem. So I don't know what the answer is, Kevin. Like, that's the only, I guess, if you're going to cause a fault to this doc, and docs aren't, it's not really a fault that's real, because documentaries aren't supposed to solve things. They're supposed to just illustrate things. But nonetheless, there's no solution offered at the end of this movie. The end of this movie is
It's right now.
a guy
Like
playing with a dog.
Not even a year ago. Like, the end of the movie is the end of November 2016. This is like still relevant. Like, it was announced last week that Russia was bad. This movie is an important step, and it's maybe the movie in itself. I think is part of the last 3 stage here. It's the acceptance. We need to accept that there was a system. We need to accept that that system might exist somewhere else, but here we have proof and evidence, which means we can't use this to change our ways, maybe. But it did start with Rodchenkov going to then Yuri Nagornik, who was the deputy sports minister, then to Vitaly Mutko, who was the sports minister, then Vladimir Putin. That was the 4-pronged system to control the entirety of the doping aspect of the Sochi Olympics, and that is provable, and that's the acceptance parts, what we do from now on. What do we do to make sure that sports is not used the way it was by Russia politically, for propaganda reasons, for increasing their sphere of influence? And Duane, I'm being quite polite, because in reality, what they did is not just grow their sphere of influence, they grew their borders, they've annexed territories, and they've kicked people out of their houses. And it goes on both ways. I agree. It's political, it's military. There's 2 sides, and there's two band of armies shooting at each other. But those are facts that happened since that moment in 2014. And I think it's important we put things all in perspective, yes, but things are more correlated than isolated.
No, for sure. And look, right now I'm sad right now. The more we talk about this, the sadder I get, because I love the Olympics. And the reason I love the Olympics is because I love Olympians. I love the idea of these people that have excelled and have dreamt and have trained and have worked so hard to get to where they are. And I know that there are a lot of them that did it legitimately. But the fact that this is out there is something that all of us that love the Olympic movement and that love the Olympics need to wrap our hand around, because we need to kill this. We need to figure out how to fix this, because, as you just said, Kevin, this goes beyond sport. There are people that are legitimately dead right now because Putin got his way, got his popularity, got his ability to expand his sphere based on the popularity that he gained, based on the manipulation that he made in sports. This is important beyond the scoreboard. And if we love the scoreboard, and if we want to keep loving that, we need to squash this out, because otherwise it's going to kill this movement. The Olympics will be dead in a generation if we don't fix this, Kevin. And I don't say that with hyperbole.
No, I totally agree with you. Like Dick Pound say, who would want to watch something fixed? No one. Except if you're a pro wrestling fan or hockey fan. Those are the 2 fixed sports out there. But outside of those fixed sports, the other part of acceptance, I think, is to not try to just point fingers and blame and trying to get rid of those people. There's going to be other people taking their place. You cut the head of the snake, it grows 2, 3, and maybe sometimes you can't even find how many heads the snake grew. What I'm talking about is we have to teach our children. I don't want to be the guy with a high moral here, but we need to teach them that it's about themselves too. It's about how you go to bed at night, and how you see yourself, and how proud you are of your own self. And it doesn't matter if you finished 15th, if you know you did the best you can, and you did the best physically possible within your limits of your physiological body. That's what you need to focus on. Not wanting to beat the guy who's doping. You need to forget he's not better than you. He found a way to cut the line, to maybe cheat the system.
this is where we need to go to the first half of the movie, and we need to look at Brian's story about how he went into this race, which was a race that only 300 people in the world care about, but he was one of them, and well, maybe 600 because there were 400 in the race, but whatever, there's not a lot. And it was about personal achievement and being accepting of that. And the fact is, he did it for a reason, but he doped in the second year and he finished lower than he did the first year.
That tells me all I need to know, because it's all between your ears. And it truly is. And cycling is a good example for that, because the sport of cycling is not just how far and how long can you ride. It's how long can you suffer compared to the other one. It's how long can you endure that cramp in the last kilometers of Mont Ventoux and that wind that's blasting on you because there's no tree cover. How long can you sustain that effort while suffering an immense amount of pain? It's about that. And doping does help for that, but it's between your ears. It's how... I don't want to say the mentality, the toughness of the mentality or the mental toughness, because there's a bad connotation with this nowadays. But what I mean is how long can you mentally endure a difficult moment for future glory? That's what the sport's about, and it's not about chemicals you put in your body. And for me, if I know that I can do it and I'm doing it, I just can go to bed easier at night knowing I did what I'm supposed to do and not overtax my body and not just put something in me that would basically make me a Superman.
Look, very few of us are Olympians. They are the elite of the elite, and they have genetic advantages that you and I don't have, Kevin. Like, I take inspiration in the fact that I won my Keeper of the Year last year in my men's soccer league. I take pride in that because you know what? That's as pathetic as that sounds.
Yeah.
That's the highest level that I can achieve. You know what I mean? Like I stood up and I rose myself to a level that I was capable of, and I couldn't go any further. I'm never going to win the World Cup because I'm not good enough, and that's okay. Right now, you know what I'm thinking of? I'm thinking of a couple things. I'm thinking of Becky Scott's face again, which I think
Poor
is
Becky.
the highlight of the movie.
Well, okay. Can I say what I would... So go ahead.
Olympic champion Becky Scott. Olympic champion. She's
Yeah, don't
an
forget.
Olympic gold medalist. She finished fourth on the day. She's an Olympic gold medalist. And I think we need to say that hard and strong, that woman who is now out there trying to fix the sport for other people like her, she's an Olympic champion, and we need to say that. I'm also thinking of friend of the show, Evan Dunphy, and his fourth place finish at the last Olympics, because that was every bit as inspiring to me as anything I saw during those 2 weeks. So it's not necessarily about the podium. It shouldn't be. It should be why we love this, why we stick with this, even though everyone around us tells us that we're idiots for sticking with it, is because we love the inspiration that we get from watching these amazing people accomplish things that they've dreamt of. And a seventh place finish when that's all you have is every bit as inspiring, every bit as important as winning a tainted gold. For sure. And that's kind of my final message here.
My final message here, Duane, for me, it starts with the same scene that you were talking about. But it's not Becky Scott who was sitting next to Brian Fogel. It's in front of Brian Fogel. It's Christiane Ayotte, which was one of the chemists. First of all, she was the head director of laboratory. She is of the Montreal laboratory, which is WADA sanctioned, and then it's in the head office of WADA here in Montreal. But Christiane Ayotte, her reaction was like, "You think I'm..." And is he sorry? She wanted to know if Gregory Wachenko was sorry, because she was looking at it that a person who was taken advantage of, who was used. Her name, her will, her skills, her reputation was used in that laboratory in 2014 to give them some sort of credibility, even though there was one located in the fire exit as well that was made to hide things. The normal laboratory was made to be a very clean and very righteous one, and because of the works of Christiane Ayotte and other chemists that were present during the Olympics working out of that lab. And she went about it with a very personal reaction, very personal, just out of the blue. And is he sorry? Because my thought is, I'm not happy and I'm really angry about it. And I like how Brian Fogel put in perspective, and he's risking his life for this. But what I think we need to do now is, in the acceptance part of the movie, in the end of the movie, you have to understand and you have to accept what happened. You can't just turn yourself around with anger, feeling the emotion of being taken advantage of, and trying to point finger, point blame, and go with a vindicative mindset to try to punish what happened. There's thousands of people involved, literally thousands of people involved in this games. In the history of doping, there's millions of people involved since '68 probably about doping. So the way we need to approach this is not just to have that vindicative mindset, but it is to have an acceptance that yes, we were played. We were made fools. We were taken advantage of. We were not seeing the whole doping scheme as a global problem or as something big. We need to change how we do stuff. We need to change how we view not just doping. We need to change how we view training, how we treat our athletes in the young age up to the elite level, the ethics surrounding everything. We need to look and reassess how we do sports as a whole. And I think this is the acceptance we have to deal with is yes, things needs to change now.
I accept the past. I accept that I have been cheering for cheaters, that I have watched cheaters for years. I accept that. I understand that. I'm not naive. I'm not delusional. What I don't accept is that we as society can't be better. And I think that maybe, even though the movie didn't say this, that's kind of implied out there, that we need to be better and we need to not accept this. We need to not buy into the dystopian finish of the novel 1984. We can be better. We can make this again about the Becky Scotts, about the Evan Dumpies, about all of the clean athletes that are there for the right reason, and for like your kid that just wants to love sports and be the best he can be, because that's ultimately the victim here, is that everyone down the line that sacrifices themselves, that hurts themselves, that puts something in their body for no good reason. Because you know what? Putting something in your body is not necessarily gonna be the end of the day. You're not necessarily gonna win, because a lot of people are doing it, and that's the saddest thing at all. Anyway, I don't accept this, Kevin. That's my final thought. My final word on this podcast is that I don't accept this. I'm not in the acceptance stage.
One thing I want to say is I want to highlight the courage and, well, the balls of Brian Fogel himself throughout this story. Because there must have been multiple times during this whole damn thing, it would have been easy to let go of that story. Would have been easy for him to be like, you know what, that was not the story I set out to say. It was not the story I set out to tell in my movie. It was about me, it was about my race, it was about that. But when he saw that the story was bigger, not just in him, not just in Grigory Rodchenkov, but it was bigger than sports itself, he let the story take over and did what he had to do. Find a new producer, change things, get budget, get security, whatever the case may be. Things needed to be done to make sure the story was told correctly, and he acted accordingly. And I have to say, because of the antagonists involved, because of the Russia and how big this conspiracy was in the government of Russia and the physical ramification that could happen with this. We've seen the death of Nikita Kamaev. Yes, it was a alleged massive heart attack, but there's other people involved in this story that were not necessarily named during the documentary, but there's other people, protagonists, that had suspicious death as well in this whole scheme. So the threats were real, and Brian Fogel still decided, with the backing of Netflix, to go through with it, and I have to commend him for it.
No, fair enough. And yeah, anyone who speaks out, I'm going to thank them, because again, the movie ends with, you know, a man playing with a dog. It humanizes this thing, right? There's no villains out there. There's just people in situations. We just need to be better. I'm lost for words right now. I'm rarely lost for words. Anyone who knows me would laugh if I said I was lost for words, but I am, because there's no black. It's gray. The whole thing is gray, but there is a white, Kevin. The white is clean. The white is not going down that road. We need to get ourselves a little less black, a little more white, and that's honestly my final word. I'm out of words now. I'm really out of words. But
you can
watch the movie. If you haven't watched the movie, watch the movie.
Yeah, no, watch the movie and think about it too, because I think it's a type of movie that you can't just watch it. You have to watch it and think about it, and maybe rewatch it and rethink about it. Thinking about it twice, it's kind of like the same as double think, because that's exactly what it is. It's doping and anti-doping at the same time. You are working for Big Brother and against Big Brother at the same time. That's what Gregory Rodchenkov does. Classic double think. Stuck in the middle. Being told to do one thing on one side and knowing that the truth is somewhere else. Is knowing what the truth is and still acting against it because of forces outside than yourself. This is way more complicated than it should be. We just want to watch people play sports. And you know what? That's what we're going to continue to do. For Duane Rollins, I'm Kevin Laramee. We'll talk sports next time. And until then, have fun.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.